Hello again, this is Dr. Robert Guthrie. I'm glad to be back with you as we continue our journey through the Old Testament. We're now getting toward the latter part of the Old Testament. We're into the wisdom literature. The wisdom literature encompasses only about 5 books in our current Old Testament, and they deal with difficult questions about what's the meaning of life and why do we have the various troubles that we have in life, and why do we have to die, and why do bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people. Those kind of fundamental questions you can't answer because we have those issues now. And what does it take to be happy versus miserable, etc. And what things can we do to affect these things in our life? So the books are Ecclesiastes, which we're going to cover today. Proverbs, which are different. They're short statements, do this and do this and do this, which we'll cover next week. Job, which we'll cover next week. Then 2 books which are more literature than history. Jonah, which is about the relationship between God and man. Jonah's my favorite character in the Old Testament, by the way. And Esther, which is really about, doesn't mention God, but it's mankind and society. And then a romantic poem, sonnet, whatever you want to say, Song of Song or Song of Solomon. We'll try to do that next week. Wisdom literature was relatively known throughout the ancient world. Egyptians had their own wisdom literature, the Babylonians had theirs. There was a lot of wisdom literature which came out of the ancient Greek world starting about 600 BC with the age of Athens and Socrates and Plato and all that. And the Greek world developed a number of very specific philosophical patterns, belief systems: Stoicism, Platonism, named after Plato, Neoplatonism, Epicureanism. I do not know what these things are. I am not a student of the philosophical disciplines and have no intention of trying to do that at this point in my life. But there is some similarity between those and the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. They were from about the same time frame, and the wisdom people in the Old Testament probably knew about the Greek philosophers because the Greeks had taken over ruling the Eastern Mediterranean, Palestine area after Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great came through about 330 BC, destroyed the Persian Empire, conquered Egypt, all the way through Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, even into India. And finally his troops said they're not going any further, and they refused to go on, and he went back to Babylon, and he died at age 36 of a disease, probably of interesting. He sighs all these battles and dies, probably typhoid fever from the description of it. But what we're going to deal with are the questions about the values and how we interpret them. How are we supposed to live our lives? What are the things that we should value in our lives? And are the things that we traditionally value without talking about, are they really things to value in our lives? So as you get into the wisdom literature, there is a very different point between the Greek philosophies and the other wisdom literatures and the Hebrew wisdom literature. Hebrew wisdom literature is very limited. It's just these books we talked about. And Ecclesiastes makes it the clear statement, and Jonah the same way, that God is in charge. The Hebrews had one God, a God who was very active in the lives, who was in charge of the world and in charge of their lives. And this is very different than the nature gods of the polytheist groups. If you study Greek religion, which I've done just a tiny little bit, their gods were not the all-powerful present God that we have now. They were nature gods. They had the moon and the sun and the sea and the this and the that. But they really were more human characteristics. They were spiteful. They were jealous. They were romantic with each other and all kinds of stuff. So they took all the human vices and described them in deity. Very different than the Hebrew God, which is the creator of the world and in control of the world and in control of these people. So it's a very different type of wisdom literature because you're trying to figure out what God wants and what God's going to do and how that's going to affect you. So we'll deal with these complex issues first with Ecclesiastes. And it's a very interesting book. It's difficult to put in history Most people think it's in the post-exile period, which actually means anything from about 530 when the exile came back all the way through to the time of Christ. People place it about 250 to 200 BC when they're under the rule of the Hasmonean Greeks. The Greek culture is there, and before the Maccabean Rebellion, which is a Hebrew uprising about 160, 170 BC. And so they're in that era where they're familiar with Greek culture, they're speaking Greek language, but they really developed this book as a true Jewish Hebrew attempt to answer the unanswerable. How can you solve these questions? What is the meaning of life, etc.? You can't. A lot of bad things happen to good people and vice versa. So the traditional books that they have included in the wisdom literature, some people put in, everybody puts in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Job and Song of Solomon. Some people include Jonah, like I do, and Esther. They're sort of wisdom literature. And some people put Psalms in. I don't buy that. Psalms are Psalms. It's not aphorisms about life or dealing with the questions of life. These are the hymns that they sang at their worship services, at their weddings, at their funerals, at their personal things, at their harvest festivals and all that. Psalms are a unique book, and that's just Psalms. So that's the wisdom literature that we're going to see. We really don't have a lot to cover anymore. But Ecclesiastes is a very interesting book. It's one of the rare books from the Old Testament that actually can deal with questions of modern life. We have questions in modern life now. What is the meaning of life? Why are we doing the various things that we do? What really are we trying to occur? How much happiness is produced by getting rich? Not much, if any. And are becoming powerful or becoming famous. Because when you look at it, the rich and powerful and famous people seem just as miserable or more miserable than we are. And once they've achieved this fame or rich or whatever it is, and they're still as miserable, they got nothing to look forward to. So it's very, very interesting. So Ecclesiastes is a very interesting book. It's probably, like I said, written about 230 to 240 to 200 BC. And it appears to be written by one person. He calls himself in the Hebrew Quoleth, which is translates as preacher or teacher or lecturer. And the Ecclesiastes is the Greek translation. This book was translated in the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures about 150, 180 BC in Alexandria, Egypt. And that helped to get it into the Hebrew Bible. There was some discussion of whether it was going to make it around the time of Christ, and it kept it in, which is good because it's a very important book. The key thing in understanding its difference between the difference of the other wisdom literatures and the Greek philosophers is that in Ecclesiastes version, God is in charge. Now, a lot of the mystery is you and I can't figure out what God's purpose is. God knows what his purpose is, but we don't know. And we may not be able to figure it out. And so you have some very interesting questions there in it. And they were at a difficult time where they were dealing with the Greek culture, and they were, but they had the unique approach that God is in charge. Not the Greek gods were not in charge. They were just around, hanging around, being difficult and all that. And it appears to have been written, I said, by one guy who called himself the teacher or the speaker, and he says God is in charge, but his plans are a mystery. And there are two sections, 1 through 6, which is what I recommended we read, and that's what I've based this on, and 7 through 12. 7 through 12 doesn't read as well. It's slightly editorialized, and it's got some extra additions in chapter 12. But 1 through 6 really gets to the heart of the matter. And we should read this regularly in Sunday school classes and stuff like that, because it really raises the questions that we need to wrestle with here in modern life. It's the only Old Testament book that does that. So the writer is challenging all the assumptions that we value, many of the values we strive to attain: prosperity, riches, luxury, fame, position, advancement in life. He says they're all just chasing the wind. They are nothing. And there's nothing new under the sun. What was will be again. What has been done will be done again, and there is nothing new under the sun. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, how futile it all is, mere chasing after the wind. Another one on wisdom. More wisdom, much grief. The more knowledge, the more sorrow. Then he talks about, so he challenges all the things that we look for. He talks about trying to achievement. That's what he's talking about here. It's just chasing after the wind. And he says, I'm going to try pleasure. I'll eat and drink and see if that makes me happy. And that's just chasing after the wind. It was of no use. Then he tried knowledge to learn new things. That was just chasing after the wind. He makes a very good point about wealth. And I'm going to work hard and get wealthy, and I'm going to build a big palace, and we have this garden and all this stuff. And that doesn't matter either, because that's chasing after the wind. And in the end, we're all going to die, which is a fact. And so you can amass all this wealth and prosperity in this palace, and you die, and someone else who has no interest in it, they kick it over. You do all this, and they get it. It's very, very interesting. Now, to me, this is so important because he's saying that most of the values we value are folly. People forget that Jesus said over and over again, he talked far more about the challenges of money than he ever did about the challenges of sex. And people think he was all about sex and all this stuff, and it really very rarely, and he was mainly talking about money, that can't love God and money. He said it over and over again. And he talked about the trying not to achieve and brag and this and that. And you'll find, and I have seen this. I have seen people, I spent 40 years in academic medicine. If you're going to find a world where people are greedy and aggressive and trying to climb up to prestige and power, it's academic medicine. We're talking about med school and stuff like that. I've done it for 40 years. And it's very, very interesting because this is why the book means so much to me. I've watched people who spend their career trying to climb the top, clawing and scratching and all that to get up there, tromping over people along the way, treating anybody like a commodity to get there. And then they get up there and they're just as miserable as they were before, and everybody hates them. I can think of a couple of people like this. And one guy was at the barber shop a few years ago, and he asked me about one of these people, and I described him in terms I cannot use in this presentation. And he laughed and said, yeah, his wife had worked with this person, and they agreed completely. So what's the point of clawing your way up there, all the way up, to have people hate you? Because you only absence for time. You get sick, or you get forced to retire, or somebody nails you, or you die, and it's all over, and people just think, what a jerk. You can also see the other types of this kind of foolishness. The best example, of course, was the people who were bribing some agent to get their children into high-fame universities as fake athletes when they weren't athletes, posing them so they could get in at Stanford and Cal Berkeley, and I forget all the places, paying this guy hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you think about it in a logical sense, that's crazy. Why would you want to get your child into a college where they couldn't get in anyway? You're just going to make them miserable. They're not going to do well academically. They're not going to feel good socially because they're struggling and they're an outsider, and they know it. Why do you do this? Because you can brag about it to your friends. Oh, we went to see Susie, and she's up at Stanford or Berkeley. You can name somebody. I can't. And all done for personal bragging rights for the parents. Now, talk about chasing after the wind and folly. There it is. Because he said in the ultimate end, God's going to be in charge, and you're going to die. And you're not going to know what God's plan about this was, what God's intent about this was. He's going to keep it secret, and he's going to be in charge. So you have to accept that. So it's a very, very interesting book. And I can relate personally to it because I struggled early on with ambition about the career. And then since I married so well, we thought, we don't need any of this. We don't need to climb the academic ladder. We don't need to do this. We don't need lots of money. We live relatively simply. And so we did things that were best for the family, best for the kids. I got an offer to go interview for a chairmanship of the department of Brown University in Rhode Island, Ivy League school. It'd be a great plum in your, if you're say, hey, I was a department chairman at an Ivy League school. But the kids were in high school and middle school. Did we really want to move to Rhode Island? No. So I said, no thanks. I didn't get offered the job. I got offered to come and interview. I probably could have gotten it because I had a better resume at the time than a lot of other people do. But that's the kind of decision you need to make, not chasing the wind. Because in the end, does it really matter if you were chairman of a department at Brown, as opposed to having your family be happy and comfortable with you? No, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. So, and you're all going to get sick, you're all going to die. And so that was what makes this book so valuable, is that we can look at it and see that the basic challenges we have were identified 2,400 years ago, whatever it is, 2,300, I can't do the math, and haven't changed a bit because human nature hasn't changed, people haven't changed, et cetera, et cetera. So I think as a belief system, Christianity, we should study this book at least once a year. The modern Jewish people do read it at one of their festivals each year. We should do that. I never remember a sermon on Ecclesiastes. Do you, Bree, remember a sermon? My daughter doesn't remember one either. It's to be a difficult sermon to do, but it really raises questions. And we should be studying this because it makes us think, these things we just take for granted about being, making, got to do this, got to climb that ladder, got to do this, So anyway, I've lectured you enough. I'm going to stop. Now, also remember that at this time, I did make one point I forgot. They did not believe in a heavenly afterlife like Christians do. The Jewish people still don't. They believed in kind of the Greek, they call it Sheol, the Greek version where you get sent to the underworld and you're just stored there. And so they didn't look upon it now, but we look upon our faith getting us a heavenly afterlife as good Christian beliefs, saving us from our sins, because we're certainly all sinners. So I'm going to stop there. Next week, we're going to touch on Proverbs. I would recommend you read 3 chapters because they're 3 different sets of Proverbs as they're presented, chapter 3, chapter 10, and chapter 23. You don't have to study them, but you just see how the Proverbs are framed. Then we'll do Job, just a little bit of Job, because a lot of Job is very tedious. Job 1, first and second chapters, 38, 39, and 42. If you want to read Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, if you got an extra 20 minutes or half an hour, go ahead and read it. Most people have never read it. I haven't read it since we did it in college 50 years ago. And I'll try to read it again. I'm not certain we're going to get to it. We may just skip it. It won't be any loss if we skip it. So this is Dr. Guthrie. It's been a pleasure to be back with you. Thank you very much.